Do we know, did the Prophet Muhammad come here, Hunna?
Yes.
Last week, Channel 4 aired a controversial documentary, Islam, the Untold Story. In it, historian Tom Holland goes in search of the roots of Islam and appears to find nothing but a black hole.
Was Muhammad even a travelling merchant? The evidence is almost non-existent.
Searching for historical evidence of mentions in the Quran for the duration of the 71-minute documentary, Holland finds very little.
When you read through and through the Quran, what's really striking as compared, say, to the Bible, which is full of allusions to recognisable landscapes that we know, in the Quran, it's an effort to find an allusion to any landscape or natural setting that we could actually pin down.
Holland questions the relevance of Mecca to the Islamic belief, stating that there is only one very vague mention of Mecca in Islamic texts, and that Muhammad never lived there. He also claims that Islam did not exist until well after the death of Muhammad.
The astonishing thing is that nowhere, not on his inscriptions, not on his coins, not on any of his documents, is there so much as a single mention of Muhammad.
Questioning fundamental Muslim beliefs, the documentary provoked an instant storm of controversy about the accuracy of Holland's research. Numerous responses to the documentary's accusations have criticised Holland's reliance on Western scholars and English-language material. The media regulator Ofcom and Channel 4 have received over 1,000 complaints about the accuracy of the documentary and its offence caused to Muslims.
Most of it is clearly not history. They're being cleaned up by all kinds, or cleaned up or messed up, if you like, by all kinds of, interests that people have in the memory.
Others, however, have welcomed the delve into Islam's foundations. Tom Holland has responded to criticism by stating that the documentary was meant as a historical endeavour and is not a critique of one of the major monotheistic religions. He wrote on Twitter, "You win some, you lose some."
Well, was Channel 4 right to broadcast this documentary? Did you find it offensive? If so, what exactly did you find offensive? Or do you think the film was biased and not objective? Tell us what you think. Call in. The number should be at the bottom of your screen. Now, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Muhammad Ansar, a political and social commentator. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
You're very welcome.
And also on the phone, I have Dr. Muhammad Azad from Cambridge Muslim College. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for joining us as well. If I can come to you first, Dr. Azad, just generally, what did you think was the motive behind this documentary? Because it wasn't accurate according to everyone that I've spoken to.
I didn't know what to think. I was absolutely thunderstruck by what Holland said and what he didn't say. I thought it was extremely disingenuous. He cherry-picked his facts and relied on Patricia Crone primarily, who's anti-Arab and anti-Islamic contentions, and her works have been disproved by scholars throughout Western academia since the mid to late 80s. These are outworn. These have been proven totally incorrect. And so many things in there.
You said, I mean, if we just take one of the points you raised there.
One last thing. He's
Sure.
not a historian. That's the whole point.
Okay.
He's a historian. He writes about vampires. He had a book, The Vampire, in 1995, and Supping with Panthers, Sleeping in the Sand. And so lately he wants to be a popular historian. And so, to answer your question, initially, I was embarrassed. He called himself a historian. He's not a historian.
So
if he is, he didn't use all the evidence. That's basic.
So in your view, sorry, Dr. Azad, if I can interject there. In your view, you don't find the documentary to be objective or follow any known science of looking at historical incidents. But one of the things you said that it was disingenuous and that he cherry-picked his facts and the people on there. Who would you think should be involved so that this documentary would have been balanced? I mean, what was missing in your eyes?
Well, I think objectivity. There are certain things when looking at the history of Islam, and it is very much historically documented in many different sources. There is evidence from a number of sources, including Greek sources, Christian sources, and other non-Islamic sources that from the period, there's a Doctrina Jacobi written in 635 that refers to Prophet Muhammad and the Saracens.
It refers to him as the prophet of the Saracens. And actually, interestingly enough, Tom Holland, who we did invite to this program, admitted in Twitter that source does exist.
Thank you. Of course it exists. Yeah. And anyway, but another thing for me as a historian looking at Islam, because I'm a convert to Islam, was the fact that there is an oral tradition, something which we in the West usually don't take much credence in, but in the Arab tradition, oral tradition is very strong. And not only that, in the Islamic tradition, there is what is known as hadith. These are stories about the Prophet, what he said, what he did, what people observed him or heard him say. And now, Patricia Crone made the comment that, well, they can choose what they want to say or want to agree with or disagree with. Well, the science of hadith, as it's called, collected many tens and hundreds of thousands of these hadith within less than 100 years after the Prophet's death. And what they did is they collected them, these hadith collectors. The largest one is Al-Bukhari. He collected over 500,000 hadiths. He traveled over 40,000 miles in 40 years and discarded them and ended up with 7,900, which he felt were... So
there's, if I can interject, I mean, it was done very meticulously. Just very meticulously. One final point. In terms of the conclusion that he comes to in the program, that historically it cannot be proved, even though he admits himself he's left out some sources. In your view, Channel 4, were they right to air this, and has it breached? I mean, you said you found it. You were thunderstruck.
I was amazed.
Were you offended by this?
Well, I was offended first as a historian. I mean, this was not historically accurate. It's hard to explain hadith, but like I started to say, the Prophet said this about this at this time, and all these hadiths are corroborated and passed down from generation to generation. And the individuals who heard the Prophet say this and said this to their son or grandson, their character, their personality is put under a microscope to see if they're valid or verifiable, if these people are dishonest or honest. How did they if they were merchants, were they honest? The science of hadith, and then what comes in the end, there's some very strong hadiths that say this definitely happened, and some that are extremely weak, and then some hadiths that are still made up.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Azad, for joining me. And there are quite a few callers online, and I'm going to come to you. But I want to bring Muhammad Ansar in on this question. And the same point, really. I mean, what was Tom Holland getting up to with this documentary?
I think you firstly have to look at the documentary and look at it in its proper context. Tom's had, and I know Tom, I probably would consider myself to be a friend of Tom's, and I'm sure that would surprise a few people and bring on some criticism. But I think we have to have a look at this in the round, and we have to look at it in the broader context. Firstly, Tom wrote his book, In the Shadow of the Sword, in April. Tom is a well-considered historian up until this point. He writes about empire, he writes about history, he's written Rubicon, Persian Fire, and he's very well considered as a credible historian. Now, for some reason, Tom has departed from that with his latest book. So his book came out in April, and I asked him to send me a copy, and he did send me a copy, and I had a look through it, and I was very shocked at what I read, and I was very surprised, and I was a bit disappointed. Now, I wouldn't, as somebody who is an advocate, as somebody who is a civil rights activist, as somebody who actively campaigns against Islamophobia, I wouldn't have considered the book within itself to be something that is Islamophobic. And having met Tom and having discussed things with him, and I met him at the Chalk Valley Historical Literary Festival. It's like Glastonbury, but for history geeks. And people get together and they do talks, and Paxman was there, Ian Hislop was there, and Tom gave his talk on his book. Yeah. And he went into a great deal of detail about his reverence towards Islam. So he comes across initially as being a fan of Islam. He comes across very positively. He understands a lot about Islam, and he spent 5 years researching the book. So the question is, where's it all gone wrong? The book and the documentary more so have been heavily criticised, completely slated actually, by Muslim academics, non-Muslim academics from across the board, even from different fields of study, because people who are scholars can recognise when somebody's being authentic in the use of material and in the use of evidence. Now, the first very critical review of Tom's book came out by Ziauddin Sardar in I think it was in April actually, in the New Statesman. And Zia made some very cutting remarks, talking about the authenticity of the work, talking about the fact that Tom had relied on discredited Orientalists who look back into history and they revise history and they give a very skewed interpretation of history.
One of them is Patricia Crone, is it?
Yeah, Patricia Crone, who is a Danish historian, and they are regurgitating highly politicised, highly propagandised material from, and this stuff, we have to keep in mind, has been discredited for almost 100 years. We have Western philosophers and historians and scholars who discredited this material. So
this has been regurgitated.
Well, it has, and I think.
Well, if you hold your thought there, because I want to bring a couple of callers in and see what they have to say. Okay, I think there's Brother Mahmoud from London. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, you need to put your volume down and speak to me, yeah? Assalamu alaikum, Mahmoud. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, your views, please.
Excellent. Well, what I was going to say really is, while I was watching the program, and I thought it was completely fabricated, and it was kind of well calculated in a sense that the whole evidence was baseless. The research itself, I thought it was flawed, and I believe.
Can you give an example, Mahmoud? What did you find flawed? You know, what stuck out for you?
Well, the actual, the evidence that he used was not balanced. If you're going to talk about Islam, you've got to bring in both sides of the story. You've got to bring in Islamic scholars or Islamic historians, as well as other historians. And it was different for Beit al-Maqdis, Jerusalem. The whole idea was basically kind of seen as in when they were talking about Salahuddin Ayyubi and how it liberated happened after that. Instead of talking about the good things that the Christians were protected, the Jews was protected, it was saying that, you know, some strange reason everybody lived under the Arabs peacefully.
Okay,
you know,
Mahmoud, let me stop you there because I've got your main point, and I'm going to put that to Muhammad in a minute, but let's go to our next caller, see who's online. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Your name and where you're calling from?
My name is Driss Boumzouk. I'm calling from West London.
Okay, and your views, please.
My views, am I on live now?
You're live on air, yeah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. My first expression which I would like to express is it would be nice if was on this program somebody who liked the views of Holland, of the person of the book, in order to give to all the viewers two opinions and let the viewers know who's right, who's wrong. So this is the first thing.
Yep. Are you still there?
I feel so disappointed.
If you can speak up, we can't hear you clearly.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I feel so disappointed, subhanAllah, about an historian. I don't know him, to be honest, but from the explanation of the brother in the studio, I feel so disappointed for a great person like this to make this kind of big mistakes. So by saying that Islam didn't spread or people didn't know Islam until the death of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I mean, this is a kind of joke. And if this person really just go through the Quran, he will see clearly how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in several occasions.
Okay.
And I will give one example of how the scholars used to get the news. Al-Bukhari radiallahu anhu.
Idris, let me stop you there because Dr. Azad has made that point, and we are coming up to a break. But just very quickly, why weren't, I mean, there was a Muslim academic there, Sayyid Nasir, but why were there not Muslim scholars and historians? Because Sayyid Nasir isn't a historian.
You have to look at the intention, the motivations behind the documentary. Tom is trying to enter into an area where he actually comes out quite clearly and says, look, I don't have a lot of knowledge in this area. And he relies on a lot of Syriac scholars that have been around him. I think the important thing is in May of this year, a month after his book came out, Glenn Bowersock in The Guardian wrote a very scathing article. And Glenn is a historian of some repute. He's an academic in the field. And he said that Tom had been completely disingenuous. Right. He refuted the sources he'd used. And he raised the question, why have you used these sources? Why haven't you used more authentic sources? So the criticism's been there already for 3 or 4 months.
So before the documentary, there was a lot of criticism.
Before the documentary, and Tom knew what he was getting into when he put the documentary out. So any of the rebuttals we hear now, Tom's already been aware for months that this exists. Yeah, and
the kind of central theme that you feel from it is that the conquest, you know, the empire of the Arabs, to justify that, Islam was used similar to Romans. You know, Romans used God and religion to justify
Tom is obsessed by empire. In the green room, and I don't know if you can talk about green rooms or not.
You can talk about whatever colour room you like.
No, I wouldn't dare breach any of my personal discussions, but it's interesting to know that when I went into the green room at the Chalk Valley History Festival, it was set up like a British Empire outpost.
Right.
There were British Empire flags. There were pictures of the Queen Victoria. There were rugs made from lions with their heads intact. I mean, it was. I wasn't sure if I was there to meet with him or to serve the tea.
Right.
Right. So you know, he comes very much with an empire view of the world, and Tom has a difficulty which a lot of Western modern contemporary historians have and scholars have, which is how can you explain that the Quran is revealed in the middle of the desert to a nomad people where Christianity and Judaism is not a big influential part of culture and society, where society is driven by idolatry mainly. How can you explain that this amazing book, a criterion, a revelation for the whole of humanity that has such significance and creates the world's greatest empire at the time, how can you explain that? So Tom is searching for answers to help him believe that he shouldn't be Muslim.
Okay, it's an interesting point to stop at, and there are callers on the line. Sorry, I can't take your call right at this moment, but inshallah after the break I shall be taking your calls. Now in the second half we are going to carry on with this discussion. There's a couple more really interesting things I do want to ask, so do tune in after the break. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum.